There comes a moment in life when you realize that the more you give, the less you're valued. You keep showing up. You give your time, your love, your effort, your understanding, and for a while it feels right. It feels noble. You believe that giving more will make them see your heart, appreciate your loyalty, and reciprocate your energy. But then something changes. Your giving becomes expected. Your effort becomes invisible. What was once a gift turns into an obligation, and that's when you begin to lose yourself. But here's where the power shifts: when you finally stop giving, when you take back your energy, when you draw that invisible line and say no more, everything changes. Your silence becomes louder than your words ever were. Your absence becomes the mirror that reveals your true value. The same people who overlooked you begin to feel the weight of what they lost. They start to see what your giving once covered their own emptiness. And suddenly, your distance becomes their awakening. This isn't about revenge, it's about restoration. You're not pulling away to hurt anyone, you're pulling away to heal yourself. You've spent enough time trying to fill others while running on empty. Now it's your turn to refill your own cup, because the truth is, when you stop giving what was never appreciated, you reclaim your worth, your time, and your peace. And that's when the world starts to notice. When you give endlessly, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. You start to disappear in the very space you're trying to hold together. Your love, your time, your energy, they flow so freely that they begin to lose weight in the eyes of others. At first, your giving feels like connection. You pour your heart into every effort, every gesture, believing that consistency will be noticed, that care will be returned. But over time, that giving turns into something else. It becomes expected. It becomes the background hum of someone else's comfort. You become the reliable presence they stop seeing because they've grown used to having you there. It's not that they don't need you, it's that they've forgotten what life feels like without you. The more you give without boundaries, the more invisible your effort becomes. People begin to mistake your generosity for obligation. They stop thanking you, stop appreciating the sacrifices you make. They assume your yes will always follow their requests because it always has. What started as love becomes routine, and routine becomes entitlement, and that's where the imbalance grows, not because they're cruel, but because they've stopped having to notice. It's human nature to overlook what feels constant. When something is always available, it's easy to forget its value. But when that constant disappears, when the giver steps back, the void becomes undeniable. That's the moment everything shifts, when you finally stop giving, when you decide to protect your peace instead of pouring into everyone else's. You hold up a mirror to the world around you. Suddenly, people feel the absence of your effort. They feel the silence where your voice used to reassure them, the emptiness where your care once lived. They begin to realize that what they thought was ordinary was, in fact, extraordinary, because your giving wasn't just action. It was energy, stability, and heart. It held things together they never realized were fragile. You see, when you keep giving without pause, you rob people of the opportunity to recognize your worth. You teach them comfort without consequence. But when you stop, you reintroduce consequence into the equation. The person who once assumed you'd always be available begins to question what happened. They replay conversations, rethink choices, and start to understand what they lost. Your absence becomes the lesson your presence could never teach, and through that silence you reclaim your power, not through anger, not through revenge, but through peace, because the truth is, your worth isn't proven through how much you give. It's revealed through what happens when you stop. The world begins to adjust. The people who took without gratitude either step up or drift away. And while that process can feel painful, it's also liberating. You realize you were never meant to give endlessly to be loved. You were meant to be loved even when you stop giving. The real ones will see your value not in what you offer, but in who you are. And that's when your giving becomes sacred again, intentional, balanced, and returned with equal energy. When you step back, when you stop giving, when you finally allow the silence to take the place of your effort, something profound happens. Your absence begins to speak in a language louder than words. It's not that you've vanished, it's that you've shifted the energy. You've withdrawn the constant flow of care, attention, and presence that others had grown comfortable consuming. And in that stillness, the weight of your worth begins to take shape. People start to notice the space you once filled so effortlessly. They begin to feel what it means to not have you there, to not receive your texts, your check-ins, your encouragement, your light. Suddenly, the silence you leave behind becomes a mirror, and they are forced to face what your presence used to hide, the truth that they depended on your energy far more than they ever realized. You see, absence has a way of illuminating value. When you were giving, your effort blended into the background of their lives. You were part of the rhythm, part of the daily pulse, so consistent that you became like air, vital yet unnoticed. But take away the air, and suddenly breathing becomes difficult. That's what happens when you stop giving. The people who once took your love and consistency for granted start to feel the pressure of that void. They notice how things don't flow as easily anymore. They realize how much you held things together. They begin to see that your presence wasn't just a convenience. It was the foundation of stability in their world. Your absence becomes an awakening. It makes people stop and question where they went wrong, when they stopped appreciating, when they stopped reciprocating. They start to remember the moments they brushed off your kindness or ignored your effort because they thought it would always be there. Now, with you gone, those moments replay differently. Regret grows in the quiet. The message they never answered, the time they didn't say thank you, the small gestures they overlooked. Suddenly they mean everything, because when you step back, people are forced to see what they could only feel when it's missing. And while they're learning this lesson, you're healing. You're not punishing anyone. You're reclaiming balance. You've realized that giving without gratitude leads to emptiness, and your spirit deserves more than that. You've learned that your love doesn't have to be proven through constant effort. Sometimes the most powerful act of love is to walk away from where it's not valued. That's not indifference, it's wisdom. It's knowing that appreciation grows in the soil of absence, not in the flood of availability. So when you stop giving and step back, understand that you're not losing connection. You're creating awareness. The people meant for you will rise to meet you. They'll come back not out of convenience, but out of clarity. They'll understand now that your presence was never ordinary, and those who don't come back, they simply weren't meant to hold the value of your presence in the first place. Either way, your absence has done its work. It's revealed the truth your giving could never show. When you stop giving, something inside you begins to awaken, something you may have silenced for a long time while trying to meet everyone else's needs. You start to rediscover your own voice, your own worth, and your own rhythm. For so long, your energy was directed outward. You gave your time, your care, your presence, your attention, all in the hope that it would be appreciated, that it would build connection, that it would make you feel seen. But when you finally stop and redirect that energy inward, you realize that the love you were so freely giving away was the very thing you needed most for yourself. You begin to fill your own cup, and that shift changes everything. At first, it feels strange, maybe even uncomfortable. You're used to being the one who gives, the one who holds everything together. Pulling that energy back might even make you feel guilty, but slowly something changes. You begin to understand that giving without balance doesn't come from love. It comes from fear. The fear of losing connection, the fear of not being enough, the fear of being forgotten. But when you stop giving for validation, when you start giving from a place of strength instead of emptiness, you start to rebuild the relationship you have with yourself. You begin to realize that you were never meant to deplete yourself to earn love. You were meant to love yourself enough to know when to stop. And that's where the power begins to rise. You start to walk differently. You start to speak with more certainty. You stop explaining yourself to people who never really listened, and you stop chasing those who were only there when it benefited them. You start to protect your peace not as a defense mechanism, but as an act of self-respect. You realize that you don't need to prove your worth by showing up constantly. You prove it by knowing when to rest, when to step back, and when to let others carry their share. That's when you evolve from being a giver who is drained to a giver who is discerning. The beauty in this transformation is that it doesn't make you colder. It makes you wiser. You learn that boundaries aren't walls, they're gates. You still love, but you love with awareness. You still give, but you give with intention. And people start to feel that shift. The ones who are used to your constant availability begin to notice that you're not so easily accessible anymore. They begin to see that your time and your energy are not guaranteed, they're earned. That's when they start to wake up. They start to chase what they once ignored. They start to value what they once took for granted, because when you stop giving and start growing, you change the entire dynamic. You stop being the one who needs to be chosen, and you become the one who chooses. You no longer operate from scarcity. You operate from abundance. You understand that your love, your care, and your energy are sacred, and they deserve to be met with the same depth in return. That's when everything shifts. That's when the world stops taking you for granted and starts trying to rise to your level. And in that space, you no longer beg for respect. You attract it effortlessly. When you stop giving, something remarkable happens. Not only do others begin to notice your worth, but you begin to see clearly who truly values you and who was simply taking from you. This is where the filters of life start to work. You start to separate the ones who were drawn to your light from those who only stayed for the warmth. When your energy is no longer a constant supply, the truth of people's intentions begins to surface. Some vanish the moment you stop giving because their connection was never built on appreciation. It was built on convenience, but others, they start to move closer. They start to reflect, to take accountability, to give back in ways they never did before. That's the power of pulling back. It reveals the truth that constant giving often hides. You start to see that relationships are not sustained by effort alone. They're sustained by reciprocity. You could give endlessly, but if the other person isn't meeting you halfway, it's not a connection. It's a transaction. And when you finally pause, when you stop feeding energy into something that's one-sided, you allow space for honesty to breathe. The ones who genuinely care will feel the shift and respond with understanding. They'll check in, they'll ask what's changed, they'll make the effort because they value your presence, not just your giving. But those who only stayed for what they could gain will disappear. And that, my friend, is a gift disguised as loss. This realization is one of the most liberating things you'll ever experience. You start to understand that pulling back isn't rejection, it's revelation. It reveals who was there for you and who was there for what you could do for them. It teaches you that real love, real respect, real connection cannot thrive on one person's effort. It requires balance. It requires mutual energy. It requires both hearts to show up, not just one. And when you stop giving unconditionally to those who don't reciprocate, you stop enabling emotional laziness. You stop feeding patterns that deplete you. You start creating room for relationships that nourish you. This shift doesn't just change how others treat you. It transforms how you treat yourself. You stop apologizing for needing space. You stop explaining your boundaries. You stop chasing validation from people who never intended to give it. Instead, you focus on yourself, your goals, your growth, your peace. You pour the same energy you once gave away into your own healing, and suddenly you're not just surviving, you're thriving. The emptiness you once felt when you stopped giving becomes fullness, because you've learned to receive from within. And here's the most beautiful part. When you rise like this, when you begin to live from a place of self-respect and balance, the energy around you changes. People start to mirror your strength. They begin to match your effort. They start to treat you as the standard, not as the option. You teach them through your actions how to value you. And even those who once took you for granted begin to understand that losing your giving spirit was losing something irreplaceable. Because the moment you stop overextending yourself, you stop chasing love and start attracting the kind that's real, reciprocal, and lasting. When you stop giving, the energy in your world begins to shift. But what's even more powerful is how your inner world starts to transform. For the first time in a long time, you begin to see yourself not as a giver defined by what you provide, but as a whole being worthy of receiving too. You start to realize that you don't have to earn love through effort. You don't have to exhaust yourself to be valued. You don't have to constantly prove your worth to deserve appreciation. The moment you stop giving endlessly to others and start giving back to yourself, your entire emotional landscape begins to heal. You start to feel lighter, clearer, stronger. You begin to understand that your power doesn't come from how much you do for others. It comes from how deeply you know your own worth. In this stage, your energy shifts from need to neutrality. You're no longer desperate to be seen or validated because you've learned to see yourself. You've learned that your worth isn't dependent on someone else's recognition. It's rooted in your own self-awareness, and when that understanding takes hold, you stop overgiving, not because you're bitter or guarded, but because you're balanced. You begin to set boundaries that protect your energy. You no longer chase love. You allow love to meet you where you stand. You don't give to be accepted. You give because it aligns with your peace. That's when you begin to operate from power, not from pain. As this balance grows, something fascinating happens. People around you start to feel your new vibration. They sense that you've changed, that you no longer bend over backward to keep their comfort intact. They feel the distance, but they also feel your strength. You've stopped trying to prove your value, and that makes them reflect on how they treated you. Some will be uncomfortable with this version of you because they can no longer control the flow of your energy. Others, however, will be inspired by it. They'll start to meet you differently. They'll start to rise to your level because your self-respect sets the tone for how others engage with you. In this state of self-alignment, you become magnetic. You no longer attract people who drain you. You attract people who match you. You stop saying yes out of guilt and start saying yes out of truth. You stop seeking validation in temporary approval and start finding joy in inner peace. You stop overcompensating for others' lack of effort and begin to hold space only for those who value your energy as much as you do. And it's in this balance that you find freedom, the freedom to give without losing yourself, to love without being consumed, to care without carrying the entire emotional load. The beauty of this transformation is that it doesn't just restore your strength, it redefines your relationships. When you stop giving from depletion and start giving from overflow, everything changes. The world starts responding differently to you. The ones who truly care will adjust to your new boundaries, and those who never valued you will drift away. Either way, you win, because when you give to yourself first, you teach others how to treat you, and that's the most powerful lesson of all. When you stop giving to be needed, you start living to be whole. When you stop giving, you give space for truth, for growth, and for alignment to find you. The most powerful realizations often arrive in the silence that follows your withdrawal. It's in that stillness that both you and others begin to see things as they really are. The person who once took your giving for granted starts to feel the loss, not just of what you did, but of who you were. They begin to realize that your consistency was their comfort, your love was their balance, and your presence was their grounding. But what's even more important is what you realize: you were never meant to sustain someone else's happiness at the cost of your own. You were never meant to pour endlessly into others while leaving yourself empty. You begin to understand that love isn't about depletion, it's about mutual elevation. As the dust settles after your retreat, you begin to witness the ripple effect of your decision. The people who truly value you begin to shift. They start to show up differently. They call instead of waiting for your message. They ask how you're doing instead of assuming you're fine. They make effort not because you demanded it, but because your absence revealed your importance. You've changed the dynamic simply by stepping back. You didn't beg, you didn't explain, you just stopped, and that pause became the most powerful message you could ever send. It wasn't an act of revenge, it was an act of restoration. For the first time in a long time, you start to experience peace, the kind that comes from knowing you no longer have to fight for acknowledgement. You've stopped proving your worth and started protecting it. The noise of constant giving fades, and what remains is clarity. You see who was drawn to your kindness and who was addicted to your convenience. You see which relationships were genuine and which were built on dependency. And while some people may fall away during this process, you begin to feel something profound. You begin to feel lighter, the weight of one-sided giving, of unreciprocated effort, of emotional labor that was never recognized. It all starts to dissolve. And as you rebuild from that peace, you find a new version of strength, a quieter, more grounded strength, the kind that doesn't need to be loud or proven. You learn to give from fullness, not from fear. You learn to love with boundaries, not conditions. You learn to care without losing yourself in the process. You stop chasing what drains you and start nurturing what fills you. And that shift doesn't just change how you live, it changes what you attract. Because when you begin to embody self-respect, life mirrors it back to you in every form: people, opportunities, peace. In the end, you realize that stopping your endless giving wasn't about withholding, it was about awakening. It was about teaching yourself and others that your love has depth, your presence has power, and your energy is sacred. You learn that real connection doesn't fade when you stop overgiving. It strengthens because what's real doesn't depend on constant sacrifice. It grows in respect, not repetition. And as you stand in that truth, you become the kind of person who gives with grace, receives with gratitude, and never again forgets your own worth in the process. When you finally stop giving endlessly, the world around you begins to recalibrate, but more importantly, you begin to transform. What once felt like loss begins to feel like freedom. You start to realize that the constant giving that once drained you was never truly about love. It was about fear. Fear of being unloved, unnoticed, or forgotten. But now, standing in your strength, you see that true love doesn't demand your exhaustion. It deserves your wholeness. You've learned that stepping back doesn't mean you've stopped caring. It means you've started caring about yourself, too. You no longer chase validation through your effort. You no longer need to be the one who keeps giving to feel worthy. You've reclaimed your energy, your time, and your peace. And that's where real power begins. The people who once overlooked your worth begin to see what they lost, not because you punished them, but because your silence became the mirror of their neglect. The absence of your giving revealed the depth of your contribution. They start to recognize that your love was the glue that held so much together, and your effort was never small, it was sacred. But by the time they realize it, you've already grown into someone new. You've stepped into a season of awareness where your worth no longer depends on anyone's acknowledgement. You know now that your energy is valuable and your presence is not to be taken for granted. You give now not from emptiness, but from abundance. You love now not from need, but from strength, and that shift changes everything. As you rise into this new awareness, your relationships begin to align with your energy. The ones who are meant for you will match your rhythm. They'll meet you halfway. They won't wait for your giving to stop to recognize your value. They'll show you they value you while you're still present. The ones who fall away, let them. Their departure isn't your loss, it's your liberation. Because not everyone deserves unlimited access to your heart, your time, or your energy. You now understand that giving is powerful when it's balanced, but destructive when it's one-sided. You've learned the art of discernment, the ability to know where to pour your love and where to preserve it. And that wisdom is what keeps you free. The most beautiful part of this journey is that your heart hasn't hardened, it's healed. You haven't stopped giving, you've started giving smarter. You've learned that self-love isn't selfish, it's essential. It's the foundation that allows you to give without losing yourself. You now move with quiet confidence, knowing that you don't have to prove your worth through action. You are worthy simply by being. Your energy radiates differently now. It carries peace instead of pressure, strength instead of struggle, and clarity instead of chaos. People feel that energy, and it commands respect without you having to demand it. So in the end, this isn't just about stopping your giving. It's about transforming the reason you give. You've learned that your love is powerful, but it's not infinite without replenishment. You've learned that your energy deserves to be met, not drained. You've learned that when you stop overextending yourself, you don't lose people. You lose the wrong ones and make space for the right ones. And perhaps most importantly, you've discovered that when you stop giving to be needed, you finally start living to be whole. That's when your life shifts from depletion to abundance, from sacrifice to self-respect, and from giving for approval to giving from love. And that is where your true strength begins. Thank you truly for being here, fully present, open, and willing to listen, not just with your ears, but with your heart. This message wasn't about blame or loss or the pain of pulling away. It was about rediscovering your strength, your balance, and your voice. It was about reminding you that giving is beautiful, but it's even more powerful when it comes from a place of self-respect. So as you leave this space today, I want you to carry one truth deep within you: your love has always been enough. You don't have to prove it, you don't have to chase anyone with it, and you don't have to lose yourself to share it. Life has a way of showing us that when we stop overextending, when we pause long enough to breathe, people begin to see the value they once took for granted. But even more importantly, you start to see your own value. You begin to recognize the strength that's been within you all along. You learn that letting go isn't the end of love, it's the beginning of respect, both from others and from yourself. Every time you say no to what drains you, you're saying yes to what grows you, and that's how healing begins, not in noise, but in quiet, intentional strength. So thank you for walking through this journey with me, through the moments of truth, through the reflection, and through the rediscovery of your power. You've faced the hard truth that sometimes you have to stop giving in order to see who's truly with you. And that takes courage, that takes heart, and you did that. As you step forward from this moment, remember, you are not defined by how much you give, but by the love you hold within. Protect your peace. Guard your energy, share your light wisely, give from fullness, not from emptiness, and when you do, the world around you will begin to align with that strength. Thank you for being part of this message. Thank you for allowing me to speak into your heart, and as you go out into the world, walk with your head high, your heart centered, and your spirit unshakable. You've given enough to others, now it's time to give to yourself. Until next time, stay strong, stay grounded, and never forget